Okay, everyone, shall we get started? Thank you for joining us in this session called China's New Pitch to Foreign Businesses. My name is Michael Wang, host of the program Global Business on the China Global Television Network, or CGTN. We are going to be discussing today the implications of China's new foreign investment law that is set to take place on the 1st of January 2020. I've got a fantastic panel to discuss all of this with us. To my immediate left, we have Director General Pengyu from the Dalian Jinpu new area. To his left is Mr. Yasushi Akahoshi, the president of the Japan External Trade Organization. To Mr. Akahoshi's left is Sue Kench, the global chief executive at multinational law firm King & Wood Mallesons. And to her left, we have Professor and Dean Yuan at the China-Europe International Business School. And then to his left, Mr. Alex Greensill, CEO and co-founder at Greensill Capital, which specializes in supply chain finance. Now, before we begin our conversation today, I want to set the context a little bit because we heard over at the G20 what President Xi Jinping spoke about in terms of China's message of openness to the world. 6 new pilot-free trade zones, more openness in the manufacturing sector and the services sector, reduction of the negative list from 48 items now to 40. Premier Li Keqiang at the opening plenary of the Summer Davos 2019 speaking about the financial services sector now being open to foreign ownership in 2020, 1 year ahead of time compared to 2021. That was the original plan. So the message from China is clear. There will be more opening up of this country, and there will, of course, be new opportunities for foreign businesses going forward. Here in this beautiful coastal city of Dalian, I just want to give everyone some perspective in this coastal city, which is very innovative. Back in 1978, the GDP of this area was around 6 to 7 billion US dollars. All right, this was before reform and opening up, before that happened. We fast forward now to present day times, and the GDP of Dalian has grown by about nearly 170-fold. So the potential is definitely there. The Jinpu new area is home to over 5,000 foreign invested enterprises. We've got over 200 cities here in China that have a population of more than 1 million, and we haven't even started talking about more urbanization in the central and western areas. A lot of areas in China still open for development. So with that context, let's begin our conversation. I want to shoot the first question over to Sue Kench. In terms of the implications for the foreign investment law, Sue, King & Wood Mallesons have called it of great systematic significance. So if you could expand on that, if you will, please. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think you started really well when you said that there are more signs of opening up. And so these new foreign investment laws really show China's determination to do exactly that. So where you had different regimes applying to foreign investors as those that applied to domestic Chinese companies, now you'll have one unified law which levels the playing field for everybody. Market access, much freer, of course, subject to the negative list, but also you've got the encouraging sectors as well. On top of that, you've got protection of IP, which is constantly in the news. You probably know that. So this sense of we're looking out for investors, level playing field, access to government procurement, more opportunities. I think it's really great signs, and it really does show China's determination to continue with its globalisation. I guess, 1 January 2020 is the start date. There's a lot of work to be done between now and then. Everyone will be waiting and seeing for that detail, but I think it shows much promise. Certainly that's the feeling out in the investment community.
And it's a good reminder because we are expecting more details between now and the 1st of January to see more meat on the bones, if you will, for the foreign investment law. Professor Ding, I want to come to you now because let's get a little bit technical here and talk about the significance of the pre-entry national treatment and the negative list combined. Why is that significant? How is that different compared to before?
Okay, I think we have to put ourselves into a much broader context or background. As you all know that before 2014, if I just let you cite the big Chinese outward investment, you might be able to cite 2 cases. One is Lenovo with IBM, another one, it might be TCL. And that means before 2014, the Chinese investment overseas was insignificant. So that means the investment flow was kind of one way. So the foreigners, they came to China and they invest. So as that particular situation, China could set any kind of preconditions for foreign investment because the foreigners want to come to China. Chinese, they never go out. So in the current new setting, which China also become a big player of investment overseas, so we need to change the rule of the game in order to earn the reciprocity. Reciprocity is becoming something very important. As you all know that trade and investments, they are totally different issues. When we talk about WTO, WTO has nothing to do with investment. Investment is never, ever regulated under any multilateral agreement, international organization. So that means China must make a gesture in order to get easy access for Chinese investors overseas. So for that part, China needs to normalize their relationship with the foreign investors in China. So in that sense, this national treatment is extremely important in order to earn the national treatment for Chinese investors in US, in Germany, or other countries. And the other one is also very important, is about this transparency about where to go, where not to go. So by establishing, and with a very short, we all hope, a negative list, so we will give a very clear signal, because if we don't do that, again, Chinese investors will face a very long negative list also from their foreign investment. So I think it's more about reciprocity. I want to add one more point on that, is the perspective of the foreign investors in China nowadays are very, very different. Because before, let's say 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, the foreigners, they came to China to establish Chinese base as one of their supply chain, which means the manufacturing function in order to produce cheap products for export. But however, as you all know, China is now becoming the biggest consumption market in the world. Since last year, overpassed US, $5.7 trillion US. So many of the foreigners, they come to China, they want to stay, and they want to become a corporate citizen in China. So which means the treatment, the institutional environment for these companies is become extremely important. Why these companies now care so much about this new law and the content? Because their attitude toward Chinese investment base is totally changed. So I stop here. Thank you.
So the strength of the Chinese consumer is certainly one of the key points.
So they want to come and stay and build a whole value chain in China. Not only just manufacturing, but also R&D, brand development, sales. So it's a whole value chain. It's not just a manufacturing spot in China and export the goods out of China.
And on that note, Mr. Akahoshi, it seems to me, at least young Chinese consumers, very interested in Japanese products. So in terms of businesses from Japan, how are they viewing the foreign investment law? I know that JETRO recently released a white paper saying that around 48% of Japanese companies want to increase their operations in this country in the next 1 to 2 years. What's on their minds?
Okay, let me begin by reflecting 40 years experience with Japanese business in China. And in the very beginning, after the opening up of Chinese economies, Japanese business utilized Chinese as a production and export base, taking advantage of cheap and abundant labor. But in the second stage, because as Professor mentioned, Chinese domestic market has become bigger and bigger, so Japanese companies shifted to aim the big domestic market, so rather than export. And I think now we are entering into a new phase. As you know well, various startups or innovation have been popping up all over China and as well as Japan. So both countries can complement each other by making good use of respective strengths. And as for foreign investment law, yes, it's significant and it's symbolic. That said, how it is enforced matters. So how the law will actually be put into effect, we have to see. I'm sorry to say to you, wait and see. But I'd like to touch upon several points. First one is, as professors has just mentioned, for Japanese companies doing business in China, is a kind of, if I use a sports term, it's an away game. But so they have to comply with away rule. But away rules should be visible, and now a lot of, not only Japanese companies, but foreign companies are looking at the opportunities in inland area rather than coastal area. And service-wise, industry-wise, service industry or with domestic demand. So away rules in China should be visible, and as like in sports, rules in away and rules in home should be harmonized, or as Professor mentioned, reciprocal. That is number one. Second, as I briefly touched upon, 95% of Japanese investment are located in coastal area, and 5% is inland area. And we've heard that business environment between coastal area and inland area are somehow different. So this foreign investment law and that its implementation should prevail all over China. That is number two. And because, last but not least, because as I mentioned, we are entering in new era of cooperation in fields of innovation and technologies, the protection of IPR is quite important. I'll stop here. Thank you. But by the way, I was impressed so much by a strong message by Premier Lee this morning. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get to IPR in a second, but you also mentioned how is this going to be enforced? Japanese companies have this on their minds. Companies from other nations seems to have this on their mind as well. Director General Lee, I want to pose this question to you. We hear foreign businesses having concerns about how this will be enforced. What is your response to that?
As for this law, we believe it is important on how to enforce the law. We have our responsibilities for the enforcement. And in the morning, China's Premier Li Keqiang was talking about the opening up of our financial industry. And when he talked about that, there was a warm round of applause. And for the foreign investment law, we have our proper recognition for this background, because this law provides protection for foreign investment. And it is also a proof to show our determination of opening up. And it is a reflection of the message sent out by China's President Xi Jinping, and also the remarks of Premier Li Keqiang in this morning. And secondly, as for our attitude, we have a very clear attitude. China has become more and more dependent on governing the country according to the law. So from the central government to the local government, this is our responsibility. And thirdly, for the law, if we stick to the law and we enforce the law strictly, and if someone is breaking the law, we will apply the penalties accordingly. And we will have a very strict punishment for anyone who breaks the law, so that it will establish an authority that the potential law-breaking behaviors will be forbidden. Thank you very much.
Dean, Ding, I want to get your thoughts on intellectual property protection. How strong is that in this new foreign investment law? How's it different from the past, do you think?
For the first time in the law, we mentioned that the forced technology transfer is prohibited. So that's a big debate we had in the past, but at least now it's set. So we acknowledge that in the past maybe we did something, now it's totally prohibited. On this side, I want to draw quite a rosy picture to everybody because it's all about self-driven, self-interest behind. I remember very well, it was 2014, I was in San Francisco for academic conference, so we're talking about international investment, foreign direct investment. There was one session, and there was one Chinese-American professor presenting a paper talking about, of course, the historical disputes about this intellectual property. And so he gave us slides showing a paragraph. Apparently, one country was accusing the other one about this violation or whatever. At the end, of course, he just asked the audience, guess who? So everybody, even including me, thinking about US accusing China. But actually, it was UK accusing US 100 years ago. And then he gave another anecdotal evidence, which was quite funny, is that Mark Twain, the famous writer, had to take residency in Canada in order to protect his own copyright in Canada, because at that time, US never protected any copyright of foreign authors in US, so people can print books without paying the royalty. So in order to protect the American writers, they had to go to other countries to become resident. So, and then you know how long the US went through that protection. And then to give you a very raw and cold analysis is that only when the country starts to become a net intellectual property producer and they have the interest and start to seriously, severely protect it. And if you look at the Chinese one and the R&D investment, the IP from China, and Huawei, for example, is now way above the top 10 producer of IP in the world. So China is becoming a net property producer on this intellectual, or we call it intangible assets in accounting term. So we try to protect more, so which is quite good. And so that's why we can expect a lot of protections. But one thing we have to be very sure, I really like the commitment from Mr. Lee he just made, but we really need to be very careful to educate not only the companies, but also our own public servants, our government officials, to not make some mistakes. Because last week, I saw there is a mistake in Hainan Island, that one government official just tried to downplay a brand registered by a Chinese SOE hotel chain called the Vienna Hotel. So I think this is a very bad counterexample to show to the foreign investors. In order to give them confidence, it's not only to enforce that to the company against some violators, but also the government officials, they need to learn how to fit into the new regulation and the new habit to regulate the market more with the laws and the market-driven, like Premier Lee promised this morning.
So how to streamline the thinking between the central as well as local provincial governments, etc. Okay, Lex, I want to come to you because you recently raised around $800 million, I believe, from SoftBank's Vision Fund, and you plan to open operations here in China sometime this year. So the new foreign investment law, that doesn't cover financial services, which is the industry you're in. Existing laws will take priority over the FIL, but nonetheless, you decided to start operations in China. First of all, how's the process coming along?
Great. Yeah, the process is going smoothly. We've been working at it for some time now, and we're hopeful that we will have completed our licensing process with the regulatory authorities here in China and be operational by the end of the year. And I think we've found it a very inclusive process. We've worked with the British government as well in our engagement with the authorities here in China, and we're excited to be able to extend our technology and our capital to the market here, just as we have in over 160 other countries.
In terms of supply chain finance, why China? Walk us through the decision-making process here. Why invest in this country on that front?
Yeah, our clients are large multinational corporates who have complex supply chains that span the globe. What we do is we harness the power of the capital markets to deliver very low-cost capital to the smallest companies in every corner of the globe who supply these multinational corporates. Clearly, China is a critical part of those international supply chains. Today, we are unable to serve our multinational customers in China. Once we have our licensing approval, we will be able to do so and bring that capital markets firepower to support many hundreds of thousands of small businesses here in China using our technology and access to capital.
All right, great stuff. Director General Lee, I want to get back to you now because Dean Ding was talking about streamlining the thinking of central and local governments. What is the Dalian Jinpu new area doing to make sure that the spirit of this upcoming FIL is in line with what this new policy is supposed to do?
The Jinpu new area is the first and the 10th new economic zone in China and the first one in northeast China. All these 10 new economic areas are of great strategic importance to the national economy. As one of the earliest economic areas in northeast China, according to the guidance of Chinese President Xi Jinping, Dalian as a city should be leading the overall opening up of northeast part of China. Jinpu new area contributed quite significantly to the local economy of Dalian city. And foreign businesses and foreign companies are regarded as important cooperation partners on the way forward. So the local governments pay great attention to providing adequate service and support to foreign businesses. There are 3 areas we are working on. First, we will try to build a good platform. And a little commercial from me is that we are vigorously investing and attracting external investments to Jinpu new area. We are rolling out multiple pilots in various sectors, including the establishment of a bounded area. So these efforts testify to the attention we pay to cooperation with external partners. Second, we will focus on industry upgrading. At Jinpu new area, we have many opportunities for industry upgrading, especially for businesses from Japan and Europe. We already have a very solid basis. As you may know, the very first Japanese industrial complex in China was established in Jinpu area of Dalian city. At the national level, China is also encouraging economic cooperation with Japan. So we are currently in the process of designing an upgraded version of the industrial complex to welcome more partners from Japan. And although China is shifting to focus more on the innerland, central and western part of China as the coastal city, we believe we will still be in a position to leverage our unique position. And also following the guidance of the central government to revitalize the old industrial zone in northeast part of China, we are following up with new investments. Third, we will try to create favorable business environment. Companies like Intel from the US is enjoying very good development. in Jinpu new area. The headquarters of Intel even give an award to the Intel office here in Dalian for their rapid development and strong momentum. The growth enjoyed by Intel in Jinpu new area serve as evidence to the attention we give to foreign businesses. So from the local government's perspective, we will continue to work on policy and creating a good environment.
Thank you very much. And I have just one quick comment. And the Dalian is a quite special area for Japanese investment. And actually, we have more than 1,500 Japanese affiliated companies located in Dalian. And this number is third biggest following Shanghai and Bangkok all over the world. And a lot of Japanese companies has enjoyed the good business environment in Dalian. And actually, we are quite close from by flight to Tokyo to Dalian is less than 3 hours. So, and another important element is that there are a lot of Japanese-speaking people in Dalian. So that's why many Japanese companies has chosen Dalian as an investment destinations. And now, as I may touch upon earlier, Japanese industries would like to diversify the content of investment mainly to service. A good example would be the elderly care service because Japan is now really facing the aging society. And in 5 or 10 years, China would also follow. So by introducing our experience, both countries would be able to solve the same social issues. That is my rosy pictures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Dean, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I really want to put that investment law into a much larger, broader picture. And what we see also another very important, I call it a milestone event, was last year in November. Shanghai hosted the import fair, international import fair. So if you look at these two events, so one is a law for the investment, another is for the trade, China is becoming a normal country in the sense that for the past 40 years, China was in a catching up phase. So China, when we were kids, we all were educated that we should do more exportation, but never import product to waste up the foreign currency. We should attract more investment, but never throw your money to other places. So that was China for almost 30, 40 years. But now China is becoming a more balanced a normal country that we encourage, of course, still again, export, but we also encourage now import officially. And now we export capital to all over the world. So since 2014, I mentioned that China invests roughly more than $100 billion out of China and receiving again another $100 billion in China. So and this year, the trade balance will be almost there. That means the trade surplus will only make less than 1% of the GDP of China. So China is becoming a more normal country, but engaging with the world in both ways. So these were set the new tune for the Chinese development and the Chinese opening up for the next phase. I think that's a very important phase, and I really like what my Japanese friend just mentioned about this service and how China can take these know-hows and from the Japanese companies, and the Japanese companies can leverage from the Chinese big market to get more value added from their business model and know-how that they had in Japan. Literally, they can increase at least 14, 15 times each time when they invest in China, given the size of the population.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not just products. The services industry in China has seen absolute explosive growth. Services industry now account for the majority of China's GDP growth, so certainly a big opportunity there for Japanese firms as well. Sue, I want to come to you in terms of what this new foreign investment law means for existing foreign enterprises here in China, be it a joint venture, be it a wholly foreign-owned enterprises. How should they view this?
So we started off by saying good sign and it's opening up, and we all said it's the devil's in the detail. I'm the lawyer in the room here, and business likes clarity. So if you've got an existing business at the moment, we do know that you will have to change or have a detailed look at your governance rules, what your charter is like. But until you actually know what the detail is, it's very hard to say how you will have to move it. We do know that the power will move from directors to shareholders. That means you have to revisit your constitution. It means that you have to revisit your joint venture documents, and that will then depend on what your bargaining power is with your counterparty. So yes, now's the time to be having a good look. Now's a good time to be assessing what you might change or not change, but the specifics will very much depend on the regulations as they're implemented over these next few months. But you should be looking at it now. You should be definitely talking to your lawyer now. You should be assessing if you're in a strong or weak position, and maybe you should also be assessing what for the future you want to do as well. So good signs, but we're back to the detail.
Well, there's a 5-year transition period for existing firms as well to fully implement the foreign investment law. So that leeway also helps.
And that's great too, right? 5 years, that means that's a good sign that they're looking for compliance. They're not looking for people to fall off a cliff fast. So that means things should be done well, they should be done sensibly. They'll give business confidence, a time to negotiate and settle things down. I think that's a good sign. It's also a good sign that as they develop the laws and the regulations, hopefully they will also interact and take the views of foreign investors to see what would suit them from an attractive environment that they want to create, engage and be inclusive of foreign investment to make sure that it's the right fit further down the track.
Okay. Lex, I want to ask you, how big of a potential is China for the financial services industry? Because again, we were hearing from Premier Li Keqiang this morning saying that foreign ownership of the financial sector, various businesses in there, that's going to be open in 2020, 1 year earlier ahead. What do you think?
As we look at the working capital that's trapped in and at work in the entire economy here in China, it's for us probably the single largest opportunity. We measure it as being around about $8 trillion in aggregate tied up within the economy at any point in time. And today that is almost exclusively funded by a combination of equity and bank financing. Our enthusiasm is to bring technology and the capital markets to bring an alternative to the local market, to perhaps bring some additional competition, to bring down the cost of capital and to make it available much more broadly than perhaps the situation has been in the past, where really there are a handful of haves who have excellent access to capital because of their connections and their support, their ownership, and many others in the economy that don't have that level of support. And as you know, this event's thinking about innovation, entrepreneurship, and development and expansion. Capital is a critical component of that, and using technology and the capital markets to help to provide the underpinnings and the support, the opportunity for those businesses to grow, we think is important. So it's a very significant market and one which we see kind of enormous opportunity in.
All right, great. Director General Li, I want to come back to you. Do you think there could potentially be a mindset difference in terms of how foreign companies view China and the role of Chinese policymakers? Because here in China, policymakers seem to like to put out rules and regulations out there in a more gradual way, open the markets in a more gradual way, learn from experiences, but perhaps the mindset from corporations abroad is more about meeting quarterly or annual numbers. And how do we connect this kind of disparity, perhaps?
In the past 40 years, since reform and opening up, Dalian attracted a total of 20,000 foreign companies. In Jinpu new area alone, there are 5,000 foreign companies, including over 70 Fortune 500 foreign companies. They established over 100 JVs and other foreign businesses. So I should say that the whole process of reform and opening up is a process of integration between local business and foreign business with close collaboration with local governments. The presence of foreign investment will certainly change our way of thinking, our mindset, and also will stimulate our reform endeavor, including a lot of positive impacts and influence. As the largest area in Liaoning province, this free trade zone will develop itself into an internationally open economic zone in compliance with international regulations and practices. And we preserve mutual respect, and we aim to grow together with the foreign companies. As you mentioned, China has followed an incremental approach in carrying out reforms. Our late leader Deng Xiaoping famously put the line cross the river by groping for the stones. So a lot of reforms were based on experience. So for any major reform, it won't be achieved overnight. There is a learning curve involved, and the same can be said for this new foreign investment law. I think this law reform followed the same logic. And also you need to base your reform on scientific analysis and evidence. The third point I want to mention is that China's opening up process is a proactive and orderly process driven by the way of governance and also the overall goals Chinese government set. During the G20 summit and also this morning's speech by Premier Li Keqiang, we can feel the determination of opening up.
Ding, I want to also get your thoughts on this also in terms of foreign businesses perhaps having more of a faster mindset, Chinese policymakers more of a gradual mindset, although that gradualism may be picking up just a little bit more of a pace. How should foreign businesses view this kind of difference?
What I see is that the competitive advantage or the attractiveness of China changed. So now they are coming, as I said, they more come directly for the Chinese market and to develop something for China. So before that, it was really about getting a cost advantage from China and compete globally. And we also see that there are more and more respect of multinationals to the Chinese peers. So this is something very, very recent. As a school, we are the top school in China, so we are really at the frontier to host many of the study groups from the multinational headquarters. From Japan, we recently hosted twice, Toyota Group. So they come to China, spend a week with us, really visit some of these very innovative Chinese companies like Alibaba, of course, Tencent, some. For last year, for Toyota, they deliberately asked us to organize it in Shenzhen because they want to see the Shenzhen ecosystem. So this is very genuine, and they really feel that they can learn from the Chinese peers. So if we can better leverage that part, the timing or the patience for me is not an issue. It's really about the belief in the good faith or the goodwill of the Chinese reform. So if they really believe that Chinese authorities are working on that with a good faith, that will take some transitional period, 1 year, 5 years. I think the companies, they are playing also with a long game. Just to share with you another example from my own school. Recently, we got a visit from the headquarters of Volkswagen. And they came to us and they want to start a fully sponsored global EMB student from the top executives. Germans or Indians, they select, and they will grant this person 2 years in China as experts, working for their company, learning Chinese, and also study the EMBA from us. They just said, all the future leaders for Volkswagen, they must be China savvy, because China represents almost 50% of our profit. So they are playing apparently a very long-term game. So only we need to do as a Chinese authority is to show our good faith, and it's also a genuine a decision and a thoughtful decision. It's not just an urgent fix. So I think that's something very, very important. We need to convey that message to all our foreign friends. Very important.
Okay. Mr. Akahoshi, I want to get back to you because you mentioned Japanese firms potentially right now looking more into the inland cities of China. Of course, right now we are in the beautiful coastal city of Dalian, but when you're looking more inland, which cities in particular do you think Japanese firms might be interested in? We know of the traditional powerhouses such as Chongqing and Chengdu, of course, but are there any other cities on your mind that you feel are great investment destinations for foreign businesses, Japanese businesses, inland?
I regret to say that I'm not Chinese expert, but to studies. Actually, tonight I'm flying to Jinpu to know what's going on. Jinpu?
Yeah,
I pronounce it correct? Jinpu, to what's going on there. And I've had, actually I visited there more than 15 years ago, but there should have been a lot of change. So I don't have a clear answer at this moment, but at least I learned a lot of Japanese companies, especially has interest in inland area, not only as a production base, but also a huge domestic market.
Ding Ding, I want to get to you in terms of, are there specific Chinese cities you feel inland that's quite attractive right now?
So again, it's all about the business. So I know that a lot of people are talking about Zhengzhou as the inland is a little bit like Denver in US because of the distance and also the air transportation and the big labor pool in the Henan province. And of course, if you move further west, and like Urumqi, and then of course you end into something you didn't mention yet, the Belt and Road Initiative, because the connectivity towards further west will be largely improved, and the access to Pakistan with the corridor. So a lot of investment, especially now we're talking about the deeper integration of the textile business, because in Xinjiang you have the beauty to have the natural fiber, which is cotton, and also the petrochemical, which is the man-made fiber. So they have the resources ready, so they are promoting a lot to become the capital of the fiber business in China in the future. So there are a lot of things happening, and you have to really pay attention to leverage the competitive advantage from each places. Some places they are more related to the geographic distance, some are to the connectivity, some are to the production or natural resources. So you have really different competitive advantage in each places. And if you talk about Guizhou, they are more thinking about low emission, high-tech investment, green tourism. So you have really different angles.
I mean, Guizhou is one of the lesser developed areas in China, but they're now ramping up artificial intelligence quite a bit, which is quite interesting. I mean, you talked about competitive advantages. So, I mean, when you speak with clients, do foreign businesses understand that there are preferential policies that local governments, provincial governments have out there, and do they know how to find them and understand its implications?
Well, China's a big country, so it's all about the regions and the local authorities. And I think the other piece here is China's also a country of relationships. Yeah? So that's about good faith, it's about building relationships, but it's getting to know the local environment that you're operating in. So, you know, as you come down into a local environment, then you start to establish your relationships with the local authorities, you work out what access is, you work out what approvals you are. So it's pretty hard to talk about it at a high level. You have to sort of zone right in and work out what's going on the ground in the particular part of the country that you want to be in. So you're contrasting that, relationships, what's going on, approvals and access. And I couldn't agree more, really. It's then around what's the long game, but that's really the building the relationship. So you've just gone full circle, really. Building relationships, going back to the enforcement issue, that's again maintaining the relationship so that you're creating a precedent of relationships, of building trust, of building confidence, giving business clarity. And then over the 5 years, you know, hopefully opened up and a much greater sense of reciprocity, I think, as we started the conversation with.
And speaking of the long-term, Lex, I want to get your take on this because you are a foreign business that's going to open operations here in China. How much do you think about geopolitics these days? I know supply chain finance in your own area, but in terms of the perhaps trade disputes that we see, disagreements that we see around the world right now, and perhaps the rise of populism across the world, around the world, I would say, how do you balance the thinking between maybe the short-term noise and the long-term potential of the Chinese market?
Certainly, it's an interesting question for us. We're in the business of providing the liquidity, the sort of financial lubrication that enables global supply chains to work. So it's certainly a matter of some interest and concern to us, the debate that takes place at the moment. I think, though, what it speaks to, and indeed kind of our investment here in China suggests that businesses have to be global in their outlook, but they need to be multinational in terms of their operation. That means they actually need local operations to be able to surmount and deal with whatever the geopolitical situation may be at any time. And that kind of local national capability then means that we're able to bring the technology and also the capital of international markets into local markets to enable it to be deployed and therefore not to be impacted by kind of potentially challenges that are taking place at a geopolitical level. I think the other thing to remember, and a couple of our speakers have touched on this, services is becoming kind of, it is the principal thing that takes place in terms of trade that's financed kind of between the businesses that we support, and services are not captured necessarily by kind of the discussions that are taking place around tariffs and other restrictions. And so that part of the economy also needs to be supported, and indeed services more often than not are actually delivered by the smallest of companies, and therefore making kind of low-cost capital important is even more the case there. So I think it's that move from being purely global to actually being multinational in the way that we think about businesses, so we have local capabilities that can ensure stability and long-term execution.
Okay, great stuff. Fantastic conversation that we've had right now. I want to open it up to the floor and bring in our audience as well. We've got around maybe 8 to 10 minutes for questions from the audience. If you could stand up, state your name, and then if we could please ask a question rather than refraining from making a statement, please. This gentleman right here had his hand up. And please address your question to a specific individual if you could.
Thank you, Li Feng from Ipsos. Wonderful panel discussion. I have a question to Professor Ding as well as to other panelists. You just mentioned that China wants to be a normal country to fully comply with different global rules, and also we are, based on the foreign investment law, we are trying to give kind of national treatment or the corporate citizen to the foreign investment. But I think there's some gap between the perception of foreign government and the foreign companies and what Chinese government is trying to do or what we are doing. So my question to you is how can we actually manage that? How can we communicate to the foreign government and the foreign companies that Chinese government and we are doing something aggressively to achieve what we want to do? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. So first of all, I didn't say that China wants to become a normal country. I said China is not a normal country. Because it's a reality when you reach less than 1% of trade surplus over GDP, when you have roughly the same amount of inbound and outbound investment, that's a normal country. So we need to have a normal mindset. So that's a different story. And on the other side, you are totally right that how we can better convince the foreign companies and the foreign governments that we act as a normal country. I think what Premier Lee mentioned this morning, I just capture one important sentence, is that in the economic development, we should rely more on the market. The government can only play a supplementary role. This is exactly he mentioned this morning. If we really act like this, we will win back a lot of faith and trust from foreigners. So this is something very important. I also told my foreign media people that please do not mislead China. By accusing that China having a huge competitive advantage because of the intervention of the state, it's a wrong statement. China is so successful now because China took the way of reform and opening over 40 years. That's the strength of China, not the role played by the government. Please, don't make a mistake. So let's go down that road, like Premier Lee mentioned, and I think it will be better off for everybody. Thank you very much.
Dean, can I just really follow up quickly in terms of the reform mindset? There seems to be a continuous mindset for Chinese policymakers. Do you think that could be a competitive advantage when it comes to market access and China's growth going forward?
Yes or no? Of course, we need to define the word reform. I think that's very important. Reform means that we go for a more open, more transparent, more market-based system. This is my definition. So then we don't say that any change that we see there are reforms. So this is something we have to be very careful because if not, then we mix a little bit the message. It happened. It did happen sometimes. So on the other side, the importance is that when you become a so engaged economy with the global supply chain, we need to be very careful to manage the confidence of other people. Today I got some other interviews talking about the opening up of Chinese foreign financial market, both on equity and bond, the same problem. So if we open up the market without changing some of our older habits, that will bring more uncertainty and actually more volatility to the market. So if we want to have a stable market, we need to provide a transparent and a stable regulation environment. That's very, very important.
Okay, Mr. Akahoshi, real quick, you wanted to comment. Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, when I came here, I thought my short answer was just wait and see the implementations or enforcement. But now I become optimistic.
Hold on a second. So after our conversation in this past hour, you've gone from wait and see to more optimistic.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Good. Good.
Mainly because I heard the argument by Professor, and yes, China is not a one-way recipient of FDI anymore, but rather you are doing a lot of foreign direct investment, outbound foreign direct investment. And you may be right that I don't have a figure right now, but you may be right in saying that you are net IPR producers. China is conducting a reform, not by pressure by the US or so on and so forth, but for themselves, for herself. So it's necessary for China. So that's why I become more optimistic after hearing this argument.
Got it. Good stuff. More questions from the audience. Anyone? Yeah. Right here in the front. Hold on. Could you wait for the microphone, please?
我是来自搜狐网的。
I'm from Sohu.com. I'm the journalist. I have a question for Mr. Akahoshi. And just now, you've mentioned that Chengdu is the inland city for more research, not for the manufacturing base. So for this kind of research and development, what do you mean specifically, and how do you compare Chengdu and Dalian and Shanghai? Thank you.
Maybe let me put it this way. Again, China is a wide country, and there are a lot of towns and cities. And the reason why I fly to Chengdu is to see one example of developing inland town, no more, no less. And whether they're focusing on R&D or production or just consumptions, I have to do a kind of field study. So maybe there are other persons who know much more the kind of characteristic of various towns. So I'll stop here.
Are you able to comment on the second part of the question, Mr. Akahoshi, in terms of maybe the differences between Dalian and Shanghai, of which Japanese companies, there's a lot of them in both cities. Are there differences that you hear from Japanese companies, let's say between China's north or south, any regional differences?
Well, it's not by attitude of Japanese company, but the simple reason is that coastal area has been developing faster than inland. So that's why Japanese investment has came fast to coastal area. But again, as I mentioned before, inland area has been developing so much. So that's why Japanese companies shifted or expand their business model, including inland country.
Okay.
Is it answer to your question?
Yep. Okay, good. More questions. Can I get a show of hands real quick in terms of how many participants in the room right now represent multinational companies with operations in China? Just a show of hands. Raise them real high. Okay, so a decent amount, just to give you guys a sense of where we stand right now. More questions for our panelists. Yeah, the lady in the back, please.
Hello, my name is Abid Ibrahim. I am an agribusiness social entrepreneur from Tanzania. And to your comment earlier, Dean Deng, you mentioned that the government plays a small role, but a critical role, but you also mentioned private sector also plays an important role. I am curious to know, as a business owner in Tanzania, we manufacture organic cosmetics and food processing. And coming to China to understand the Chinese market and how China can be a potential market for us. But as a private sector in Africa, one common theme is our capacity. So what is the Chinese government or China is doing to build that capacity for us to be able to enter a market like this and also sustain our businesses here to make it a win-win cooperation between China and Africa?
Good question, and like Ms. Lee, I have to make advertisement for ourselves, but it's not for profit. So for the past 6 years, we have been running a program for supporting African women entrepreneurs and leaders called the WELA program. And just 2 weeks ago, the ladies from 4 African countries, they were all on our campus, and they spent 3 days in Hangzhou with Alibaba, then 2 more days in Yiwu with the biggest bazaar in the world. So in that program, we try to connect, not only teach them the basic management skills, to also to connect to the very vivid Chinese entrepreneur community and to develop some business project together. So my answer will be very short and direct. So I will invite you, and it's a not-for-profit project, so I will invite you to join our program next year so you can really experience that with our community and our alumni who can support you. There's one case that one Nigerian lady entrepreneur, they connect to our school and to some alumni, and she just improved 7 times her sales in Africa, thanks to that supply chain developed with some of our alumni companies. So we can help you.
CEIBS has a beautiful campus, by the way.
We have a campus in Ghana.
Maybe take up on the offer on that. Okay, I think we're running out of time, but I hope we gave you a sense of the potential of the market access and the potential of China in terms of how big this market really is going forward. We are seeing the growth of services in this country. We are seeing the strength of the Chinese consumer as well as innovation. All of this tying together to make China quite an attractive destination going forward. So how about a round of applause for our panelists and a fantastic and insightful conversation today. Thank you all.